The shadow of a genius, or the mistake that could not be made. Imagine a freezing cold workshop somewhere in the rear, in Gorky or Izhevsk. It's the 38th hour without sleep. Hands are covered in abrasions and machine oil. In your ears, there's the deafening, never-ceasing roar of the machines. This is the rhythm of war, the rhythm of victory. And the main symbol of this rhythm in the early part of the war was the PPSh submachine gun, the one with the drum magazine and the round barrel shroud that became as recognizable an attribute of the Soviet soldier as his greatcoat. Its creator, Georgy Shpagin, was a true folk hero. A simple guy from a peasant family with no higher education, he managed to achieve the seemingly impossible. He created a weapon that could be produced in the millions by unskilled workers, including women and teenagers, on the simplest equipment. The PPSh was not just a weapon. It was the embodiment of an idea. Victory at any cost. But what if I told you that this genius had his own blunder? His own failed project that could have become the new hit, but was brutally cast aside by history. A weapon that was believed in by the People's Commissar of Armaments himself, but which lost the fight for the right to be in the hands of the soldiers. This is not just a story about another prototype. This is the story of how one small crack in the metal and 12% of stoppages during firing buried the ambitions of a great designer. This is the story of the PPSh-2. Forget everything you knew. Today, we will not just flip through the yellowed pages of reports. We will dive into the very inferno of an engineering battle where thousands of lives and the future of the entire country were at stake. The call of the abyss. Why the most mass-produced submachine gun suddenly stopped suiting the army. Emotional hook. Now, close your eyes and imagine a Red Army private in the winter of 1941. He is running through an attack in deep snow. His trusted PPSh weighs almost 5.5 kilograms. That's like carrying 3 full-weight modern laptops in one hand, and in dynamic combat at that. Every step is a struggle. Every burst of fire is a short one. Because the high rate of fire eats up the entire 71-round drum magazine in just a couple of seconds. And then a long, seemingly eternal reload. Now you understand the problem wasn't that the PPSh was bad. It was great. But war is a merciless dame, and she dictates her own rules. In January of 1942, when the enemy was still at the gates of Moscow and the country was just beginning to build up its industrial muscle, the best minds gathered in the Artillery Committee of the Main Artillery Directorate, GAU. They analyzed reports from the front, letters from soldiers and commanders, and they delivered a harsh but fair verdict to the PPSh-41. What was good about it? Advantages. Grouping of fire. It shot accurately and predictably. A soldier knew where his bullets would go at short and medium range. Reliability. In the harshest conditions, in mud and frost, the PPSh most often did not fail. It was a workhorse that wasn't easy to kill. Simplicity. Any soldier could assemble and disassemble it, even in complete darkness with frozen fingers. And what was bad about it? Disadvantages? That very list of complaints. Weight. That very factor that exhausted the soldier. 5.5 kilograms is a lot, a very lot. Dimensions. With its wooden stock, the PPSh is long and inconvenient for fighting in cramped trenches, in forests, and, most importantly, for paratroopers and tank crews. High rate of fire. 1,000 to 1,200 rounds per minute. This means the magazine was emptied instantly. For saving ammunition and conducting aimed fire, this was a serious drawback. Labor-intensive production. Paradoxically, even the simple PPSh had parts that required milling work, and a milling machine and a qualified worker mean time and money. Time, which there is none of in war. And here the committee made that very Solomonic decision. A new weapon was needed. A weapon that would preserve all the best features of the PPSh, but would be rid of all its shortcomings. A titanic task. Inhuman deadlines. Essentially, the designers were given a few months to make a breakthrough. The war economy of the USSR in 1942. To understand the full scale of the task, one must realize the conditions the country was working under. By the beginning of 1942, the USSR had lost a huge part of its industrial capacity. Dnepropetrovsk, Kharkov, Zaporozhye, all of Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltics. All of this was in occupied territory. The evacuation of factories to the Urals, Siberia, and Central Asia was a feat without parallel in history. But in the new locations, there were often not even walls, let alone established supply chains. Steel. This is the lifeblood of war. Steel production fell from 18 million tons in 1940 to 8 million in 1942. Every kilogram was accounted for. A lighter weapon means saving a strategic resource. Machine tool park. Machine tools were more valuable than gold. Production that required fewer machine hours freed up equipment for producing tanks, aircraft, and artillery. Workforce. At the machines stood women, teenagers, old men. They were heroes, but they did not have years of qualification. The weapon's design had to be such that its parts could be made by a person with minimal training. It was in this crucible that the famous competition was born. February-March 1942. Several models came to the proving ground. Among them was the lightweight version of the PPSh by Georgy Semyonovich himself. The first battle and the first defeat. Emotional hook. Imagine Shpagin's face as he hands his new brainchild, the lightweight PPSh, to the commission. He knows he is the king. He knows his PPSh-41 is already flowing like a river from the assembly lines and striking the enemy. He is confident. But what if his confidence was no longer a strength, but a weakness? What if a genius becomes a hostage to his past success? The lightweight PPSh was, in essence, an attempt to make a folding stock AK out of the Kalashnikov of its time. Shpagin's designers took the PPSh-41 as a basis and started trimming it. Instead of a one-piece wooden stock, a detachable wooden butt, and a separate pistol grip. This was supposed to make the weapon more compact. The rear sight, designed for shooting up to 500 meters, which was excessive for a submachine gun, was replaced with a simple two-position one. The bolt was lightened. The width of the receiver was reduced. On paper, it all looked ideal. Lighter, more compact, more modern. But the proving ground is not paper. It is harsh reality. The tests were brutal. The weapon was fired until it broke. It was thrown into mud, into sand, and tested for endurance. And here the lightweight PPSh showed itself, to put it mildly, not from its best side. The numbers speak for themselves. Out of 2,329 shots, 3.3% stoppages. This means approximately every 30th cartridge could lead to a misfire, jam, or failure to feed. In real combat, that is death. For comparison, the Degtyaryov submachine gun showed 0.5%, and the Bezrushko-Vysotsky model 0.6%. After 2,808 shots, the rear wall of the receiver cover cracked. Metal fatigue. The design couldn't take it. After 4,129 shots, the barrel began to wobble, a critical failure. The commission was adamant. The Degtyaryov and Bezrushko-Vysotsky submachine guns were to be refined, but the refinement of the lightweight PPSh was deemed inadvisable. Imagine this blow to Shpagin's pride. His name thundered across the country, and his new weapon wasn't even considered worthy of refinement. It was a knockout in the first round. Phoenix from the ashes. The birth of the PPSh-2. Emotional hook. What would you have done in Shpagin's place? Would you have accepted the defeat? Faded into the shadows? No. A true creator, a true fighter, takes a hit, gets up, dusts himself off, and goes on a new attack. And Georgy Semyonovich went. While other designers were refining their models in the second stage of the competition in April-May of 1942, something new was being born in the quiet of his design bureau. Not a lightweight version of the old one, but a fundamentally new system. The PPSh-2. On May 30th, 1942, when the official stages of the competition had almost determined the leaders, they were Sudayev and Bezrushko-Vysotsky, a new Shpagin model was brought to the proving ground. And then something incredible happened. The PPSh-2 caused a furor. The reports contained words that probably made Shpagin straighten his shoulders. On the whole, based on the totality of indicators, the PPSh-2 has better indicators than Comrade Sudayev's model. Accordingly, and taking into account the simplicity of mastering the PPSh-2 product, Comrade Shpagin's model can be recommended for launching into production. It seemed like it was there. The triumph. The return of the king. But it wasn't that simple. Let's figure out why. Technical analysis. What was the strength of the PPSh-2? Shpagin was, first and foremost, a technologist. He thought in terms of the factory, the conveyor belt, the machine tool. His PPSh-2 was not so much a soldier's weapon as it was a weapon for the People's Commissariat of Armaments. It was simpler to produce. Manufacturability. Many parts were designed to be stamped, not milled. Stamping is fast, cheap, and does not require a highly skilled worker. Succession. The equipment used to make the PPSh-41 could be retooled with minimal changes to produce the PPSh-2. This meant a quick start and huge volumes. However, the report contained an important caveat. The combat qualities of the PPSh-2 were worse than those of the PPS, Sudayev submachine gun, primarily in terms of accuracy. That is, Shpagin won on economic indicators, but lost on combat ones. And in wartime, that was a terrible compromise. The meeting on June 17th ended inconclusively. No winner was chosen. Both sides, Shpagin and Sudayev, were ordered to prepare for new, decisive tests. The trial by fire. Sand, frost, and iron will. Emotional hook. July 1942. Bloody battles are raging near Stalingrad. The fate of the war hangs by a thread. And at this very time, the fate of the new weapon for the soldiers is being decided at a proving ground near Moscow. The tests that awaited the PPSh-2 and the PPS resembled torture more than anything. Their goal was not to test, but to break, to identify the weak link. The program seemed to have been designed by Satan himself, as the testers later joked. Contamination test. Both submachine guns were dragged by a rope over sand, 10 to 15 meters. Sand was everywhere. In the barrel, in the mechanisms, in the bolt group. Then the barrel was roughly wiped, and they were allowed to fire 2 magazines. And then the worst part. Without cleaning, without disassembly, without lubrication, they had to fire 1,000 rounds. Imagine. A red-hot barrel, sand acting as an abrasive, cartridges jamming. Frost test. After all this, the weapon was cleaned, lubricated, and thick lubricant turns into glue in the frost, and placed in a freezer with a temperature of -50 degrees for 2 hours, and then they had to fire it. The results became a verdict for the PPSh-2. When firing under contamination conditions, the PPSh-2 showed 12.7% stoppages, every 8th shot. The PPS showed 5.9%, twice as good. Both models failed the frost test, but the PPSh-2 was again less stable. The Commission's conclusion was dry and merciless. Comrade Shpagin's PPSh-2 submachine gun failed the competitive trials due to the number of stoppages when firing under heavy contamination conditions. The PPS was declared the winner. It was recommended for adoption. The war. After the war. Intrigues in the halls of power. Emotional hook. It seemed to be all over. But no, that was just the denouement and the silence of the proving ground. Behind the scenes, a real battle of titans began, where ambitions, careers, and millions of rubles collided. The story of the PPSh-2 did not end there. It moved into the political plane. The People's Commissar of Armaments, Dmitry Fedorovich Ustinov, a legendary figure, a Red director whose will forged the weapons of victory, intervened. And Ustinov was furious. He disagreed with the GAU's decision. Why? The answer lies in economics. The cost of 1 machine hour. Ustinov thought in terms of the entire People's Commissariat. He understood. Transferring dozens of factories from the PPSh to the PPS was a colossal cost. Conveyor retooling. Stopping production for weeks, if not months. New tooling and templates. Everything had to be created from scratch. Worker training. New technologies require new skills. For Ustinov, the PPSh-2 was a logical evolutionary step. Minimum cost, maximum result. He ordered a serial batch of PPSh-2s to be produced for troop trials in parallel with the PPS. It was an attempt to push through his decision. But he was opposed by the head of the GAU, Nikolai Dmitrievich Yakovlev. He wrote an angry letter to Lavrentiy Beria himself. In this letter, he tore the PPSh-2 to pieces point by point. Unreliability. A large percentage of stoppages in combat firing conditions. Inconvenience. The wooden butt could be lost. It swells from moisture. Danger. The barrel without a shroud, you could get burned after just 100 to 150 shots. Economics. After revisions, the labor input for the PPSh-2 increased to 2.9 hours. While for the PPS, it was 2.7 hours. Bottom line, the PPS became cheaper to produce. Yakovlev stated, sending unreliable weapons to the front is a crime. And then Shpagin himself entered the fray. Desperation? Resentment? Confidence in his own rightness? In December of 1942, he wrote a letter to Yakovlev, accusing the Commission of bias and prejudice. He claimed that his system was better and that the test reports gave false representations. It was an act of desperation. A special commission was created to verify Shpagin's statements. None of them were confirmed. Yakovlev, in his response to Ustinov, literally demolished the designer's arguments, ending with the phrase, "I ask you to instruct designer Shpagin to fulfill them," pointing out to him the unacceptability and harmfulness of the position he has taken. It was a complete and unconditional rout. The final chord. Troop trials and the full stop in history. The conflict was exhausted. Shpagin accepted it and even refined the PPSh-2. making a folding metal stock for part of the batch. In February of 1943, large-scale troop trials began. 50 PPSh-2s and 50 PPSs were sent to units in the Moscow, Ural districts, to the Far East, and to tank and airborne troops. The feedback was the same. Both weapons were better than the old PPSh-41, but in comparison, the PPS was better. It was more reliable, lighter, more convenient to carry. The PPSh-2 with the folding stock particularly distinguished itself, but even it could not reverse the opinion. On May 30th, 1943, a decree of the State Defense Committee was issued on the adoption of the 7.62mm Sudayev submachine gun by the Red Army and ensuring its production. The story of the PPSh-2 was over, forever. Lessons of history, or why the PPS ultimately won? Emotional hook. So what is the moral of this story? That Shpagin was a bad designer? No. He was a brilliant technologist. But war puts everything in its place. It is the most honest and most cruel judge. In war, it is not the weapon that is easier to make that wins. It is the weapon that works more reliably in the trench, in the mud, in the frost, in the hands of a tired and frozen soldier. Alexei Sudayev, a young, talented engineer, focused on the needs of the soldier. He made a weapon that was subordinated to one goal: effectiveness in battle. Shpagin, being a hostage to his success and his responsibility for giant production lines, thought about both the soldier and the factory. In that terrible race, this "and" proved fatal. The PPS-43, later called the Weapon of Victory, alongside the PPSh and the Mosin rifle, became the best submachine gun of World War II based on the totality of its characteristics. And there is a bitter irony in this. Its creator, Alexei Sudayev, died in 1946 from the consequences of exhaustion suffered during the siege of Leningrad, where he was refining his weapon. He gave everything to the victory, including his life. And the PPSh-2 remained a beautiful but unfulfilled dream, a shadow on the pages of history, a reminder that even geniuses have failures, and that the path to victory was strewn not only with shell casings, but also with the fragments of failed projects. Friends, so our detective story has come to an end. This story showed how complex and dramatic the path of even a single weapon model is. If you found it as interesting as I did while writing this material, do two simple things. Subscribe to the Historical Weaponry channel. We have hundreds more such investigations. Write in the comments. What do you think? Was the right decision made? Or were Ustinov and Shpagin right, and they should have bet on manufacturability, turning a blind eye to minor shortcomings? Your opinion is very important to us. Let's discuss.